So in the latest episode of Jobless Reincarnation, multiple reunions take place. Unfortunately not for who Rudy was looking for, but needless to say, it does lead to a very heartfelt episode that may make you feel a little tingly inside. So getting to the first reunion, thanks to Nanahashi's help, Rudy and Ellen and Lise are able to reunite with not only Geese, but also Paul. And well, Geese is, as he's always been, very happy, seemingly like a character who's a little bit out of place in a show like Jobless Reincarnation, still loving person to be around. As for Paul, while he's still very much high-ranking swordsman, he's also somebody that's pretty much been beaten down by the failures that he's had recently. Whether you want to talk about still not being able to save his wife Zenith, whether you want to talk about him losing Roxy while in the labyrinth, or the fact that he had to send away his 2 children because this job isn't quick and easy and is really testing how good of an adventurer he is, you can see that while he's not a shell of his former self, he is reeling from these defeats. But as before, with seeing Rudy, there is a sort of pride, a love that he has gotten to experience but suddenly hasn't forgotten. Well, haven't experienced lately, that is, but haven't forgotten. And for Rudy, it's odd. Not odd in a full length, like he's starting to talk to his older self and compare it to his former life, but you can see when it comes to Rudy, going from being a small child, fighting your father because of all the stuff that happened in the past, to now being an adult, being a father soon yourself, it gives a different perspective on who Paul is, and in some ways he's kind of touched by how vulnerable his father is, but at the same time so is Paul in the idea that, Rudy has for a long time put off doing anything and just was living his life out in Manoa University, but now he set aside his obligations to still feed to his future child in order to help his father and mother. But alongside this reconciliation comes Ellen and Lise facing Paul again, and while Geese tried to make sure that neither Rudy or Ellen and Lise would, go at Paul hard because he's already dealing with stuff, while Rudy's able to follow that, Ellen and Lise, it's a little bit harder, but thankfully, on site, Paul issues an apology, and while he doesn't detail why he's apologizing, Ellen and Lise, for the greater good, decides to let things... No, she doesn't let things go, but she does accept the apology, and it seems that at the very least, she'll try to set aside how she feels in order to save Zenith. But even with Geese getting the book that Rudy has from Nanahashi and from his studies, and that making things easier when they go into the labyrinth, because Ellen at least hasn't fully let go of her issues with Paul, never mind how they used to do things before Zenith came about, there is bickering between them, even to the point of him saying that she's nagging. But luckily, in the labyrinth, things go better than expected. But I'm jumping over something that's important. The night before they go into the labyrinth, Lilia is also somebody who gets to have a reconciliation moment with Rudy, and while there isn't a lot of talk about what happened during his childhood with her, since they did seem to have a little bit of beef back then, she does ask about how Alicia's doing, of which he says he wished she was a bit more selfish, but she's very good at her job and very caring. And because Rudy's about to be a father soon, that leads to a talk about sex with Paul, and it gets awkward because Lilia, who's standing right there, he talks about what they used to do before this whole teleportation event, what they still apparently are doing, even as Paul tries to rescue his wife. And while Rudy's able to laugh through it, it's the most awkward thing to watch. But in some ways, it's easier to watch than the scene that comes toward the end of the show where, after everybody's in the dungeons and looking for Roxy, we see what Roxy's going through. She has been down there for about a month. Zenith, we're told, has been down there for more than a year, but with Roxy, she's in a situation where when we see her, she's about to die. And when I say about to die, one of the monsters have knocked her staff out of her hand. She's on the ground looking beaten and tired, and she is so sure she's about to die that she pisses on herself. But luckily for her, Rudy has some type of sixth sense when it comes to her, and with that, he's able to figure out where she is and save her just in the nick of time. And the episode ends with them looking at each other, not really getting to say much, but Rudy just being thankful that he was able to show up in time. So the first hypothesis is just Rudy and Paul's relationship, especially where it is at this point. Because even if Paul can't take full credit for where Rudy is now, at the same time, he can still show pride, and he's very proud of what his son has become. His son is about to have a kid, is married, able to hold down raising or taking care of his younger siblings, and even presents this aura of maturity and peace when he enters a room. And that's very different from the kid who was very dramatic, the one who last time he saw him beat the hell out of him. And it's having complicated relationships with your father makes it so when you finally get to a certain point as an adult where it's less seeing the person as your father and then seeing them just simply as a human being who has flaws, maybe didn't make the right decisions, but in their own way tried their best. That is where I'm coming about when it comes to admiring what Paul and Rudy have, since at this point I think Rudy has pretty much let go of Paul's failings as a father, perhaps even as a husband to his mother, and recognizes that he's an example of in some ways what not to do, but at the same time you can't discount fully what the man has done that has allowed Rudy to become who he is. The next highlight for us is that in this episode we get a lot of notable action scenes, but for the most part the action is very much between Paul, Eleanor Niece, and also Rudy. The monsters are mincemeat. But when it came to Roxy and the situation she was in, even though I spoiled the show for myself by reading some of the manga spoilers so I know what happens, at the same time, you never know when a show is going to decide to give the finger to the manga or the source material in general and decide to go on its own way. So when it came to Roxy, there was a need to question maybe they could kill her off. I mean, having a character pee on themselves is a bit much, so there's always that idea that maybe she could be killed, maybe she could be maimed, and just getting into that mindset of the potential that something may not go right was a highlight for me. Now, with that not happening, there is a need to wonder if the show's going to follow the manga and make it so that Rudy, having it where Roxy was not only perhaps his first crush and first love, but someone who he idolized, and now he's grown, probably very attractive when it comes to what she likes. What will that lead to? Will they follow what happens in the manga? Will they pursue a more redeemed version of Rudy? It's hard to say, but it's something we're interested to see. Which leads to on the fence topic, and that's just, it's not a big deal not knowing what happened between Paul and Eleanor Elise, but at the same time, with them being family now, and the whole Zenith thing potentially being a part of what led to issues, I'm hoping between the journey to rescue Zenith, when Zenith is rescued, when there's a family reunion after all that happens, once Sophie gives birth, we get some kind of answer to what will happen. And even if it's just a quick drop that Paul was messing around with Eleanor Elise, she was falling in love, and then he got with Zenith. Maybe she was the leader of the pack, he broke it up so that he can be with Zenith and just abandon everybody. I want to know what exactly happened, just so that that storyline can be closed and we can move on. And overall, when it comes to this episode of Jobless Reincarnation, it feels like we got everything that Jobless Reincarnation has been at one time or another told that it was good at. It gives us good to decent action, heartfelt scenes. There's a lot of jokes in there which can be funny, and also we got a dash of Ichi, which granted sometimes can be a little bit creepy when it comes to this show, but I would say at this point it's It's part of its weird charm, and while it takes some time to get used to it, you learn to appreciate it.